Hey everyone, Weebsaurus here, and today, as the title's likely already informed you, I'm gonna be going over Trails in the Sky FC, or first chapter, in a bit of a little non-spoiler review type thing. It's obviously the first review I'm doing on the channel, and it's probably gonna be pretty basic. Add the parts of still very new to and bad at editing, and well, you know, the fact that it's the first time I've tried out this type of content. But, you know, you don't learn unless you give it a shot. So, over the last month or so, I have had the chance to go and start on the Trail series. It's something I've been planning on looking into and playing for the better half of a year, but never got around to due to other things taking up my time, whether it be new anime from the new seasonal stuff or, of course, just getting sidetracked by certain new games and watching a bit too much YouTube on the side, which I think we can all sympathize with and feel. We all sometimes just get bogged down and watch too much YouTube instead of being productive. But either way, it's a bit more of my random talking nature showing for once. So I really want to go into, first of all, some of the gameplay of Trails in the Sky FC. It's, for the most part, it is a pretty traditional style RPG in its own right. One of the only RPGs that I've seen and played myself that really remind me to an extent of it are, of course, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. The similarities mostly stop at the combat grid and ability to, when you attack an enemy, they get partially moved around and shoved. But honestly, that's about it for the most part, because the entire battle system is, for the most part, different when it comes to, Pokemon have their 4 moves, and Trails in the Sky has its own combat system, or what you could really kind of equivalent to Final Fantasy's equipable system, which is in the materia stuff. Trails in the Sky apologies. Trails in the Sky has its own little system called orbments. Throughout the game, when you defeat enemies in random encounters or scripted battles, of course, which there will be plenty of throughout the game, you will gain Sepith, I believe it's called. And as you gain more and more Sepith, when you return to an orbment factory in the primary towns or sometimes in secondary towns that you find along the way, you can both buy smaller orbments, of course, early on, but as time goes on and you progress through the game, you'll be able to slowly upgrade and get better orbments. Of course, they'll go up in how much Sepith they cost, and certain orbments you'll find yourself being at a drought of Sepith in that certain element, and you'll be trying to grind for it at times because, well, sometimes you really want to be able to heal with 1,000 HP with 2 different people or something, One of the interesting things is the augmentation system for the orbments. You have this orbment receptacle, is what I'm going to call it, because I can't remember the specific term given to it in the game. But depending on the character that you're equipping with orbments, they have their own kind of stylized orbment receptacle, which has different lines as they're addressed in the game. These different lines make it so on different sides of the orbment receptacle spectrum, when you insert orbments, they will basically add up the amount of Sepith shards that the orbments are worth. And those will be what really determine what spells you're able to use outside, of course, the spells themselves addressed on the orbments themselves. So, for example, let's say you get I don't know, heal one, or not a heal one, but a a tier one, and you get maybe like a one of the other blues, which is worth like 3 Sepith shards, that would be able to unlock the second tier of heal, which is Tira, without even equipping the level 2 heal materia. Or HP, fuck. Man, it definitely is hard to just kind of improv this stuff, ain't it? But, one take and all that. You know how it is. Their specific model will always work in that regard. The lines have their own sections, of course, and the centermost slot for your orbment will be distributed between both lines. It's honestly a pretty interesting system considering how the shard value works and how you can mix them in order to unlock those specific higher tier magics, or as they're dubbed in the game, arts. A little side note. This is tied mainly around some of the healing system and outside combat stuff. For a good 3/4 of the game, I had an issue where I wasn't fully understanding of one of the mechanics called sit-down meals. Because there are basically carry-around meals that you can create with Estelle in her recipe book that you can just lug around wherever after you make them. Use them like a regular, healing item, for example. But the sit-down meals, what I didn't realize sooner was that when you cook a sit-down meal, it's immediately consumed rather than going into your inventory. I just think because I had that issue, it's a good distinction to make, especially for some of you guys if you're curious about getting into the game. I really will never get to live that one down, at least in my own mind. Now, on to story. As I mentioned, and as the title suggests, I'm not going to be going into much detail on the actual game and its story in terms of spoilers. Instead, I'm going to be giving a brief intro to our two main characters and let you know some of the broad themes of the game. Our central protagonist of this little tale is, of course, a young lass that goes by the name of Estelle Bright. Being a pretty cheery and tomboyish girl, she took after her father and grew up exceptionally excited by the prospect of one day joining the new Bracer Guild, much like her father did. As mentioned, Estelle is very much a tomboy, and in being as such, can often find herself in trouble due to her wanting to involve herself in others' issues, and admittedly getting a bit childish and competing with children younger than her despite her age at this point. That, well enough, is where our dear secondary protagonist, Joshua Bright, enters the scene. He very much acts as a foil for Estelle. Where she acts very much like an excitable kid, Joshua is the person that sticks by her side in order to try and ground her so she can mature into the bracer that she wants to be in the end. We'll meet many other colorful individuals on our little journey, but for now, that's all the real insight on the characters we follow. At least that I'm going to give you here until you play on your own. Or watch a playthrough. Which, if you'd rather do that, go for it. Not everyone wants to sit through a good 20 to 40 hour RPG at times. Sometimes we just don't have the time. But one thing I can say for certain, if you're a fan of steampunk and certain politics that have to do in war situations in your RPGs, I am certain that at the very least Trails first chapter, there is something you will enjoy because of not only the style of the world but also the what seems to be political nature of how it rolls with the hierarchy and all, especially with the nobility side of things. It really adds this nature to it, which is a lot more. It hits that it hits that way of talking about nobility and all that king and queen stuff, where it becomes a very gray area of, in some ways this helps us, but in others it really can hinder us. Onto my personal rating and opinion towards the game. Considering my own personal taste in RPGs, alongside the general mesh of genres that FC goes for, I really do have to give some props to Trails in the Sky first chapter. As for the first installment, it both leaves a bit to be desired, because it feels a little bare at times, just because they really probably didn't know what they were shooting for in full, and considering it came out on the PSP generation originally, you can't expect it to be as flawless as it could be. But for what it is and what it's done, at least for me, it fulfills a damn good amount of criteria for staying pretty memorable, as well as maintaining my care for the characters. You know, if you can sympathize with that aspect of allowing yourself to get invested in your cute little 2D RPGs. But you know how that usually goes, whether it be a sad ending or a happy ending. You'll have to see. Now on to the important question, and the point of this review. Would I suggest beginners to RPGs to dip their toes into the waters with this series? Would I suggest this as being their first RPG if they see it and they're just, man, I am interested in the way this looks? I don't think I do. I don't necessarily think that it is a good entry point for people with RPGs, specifically because some of the more tedious aspects of the game when it comes to side missions, but also some of the technical aspects. Asking someone who's used to a shooter to jump in and immediately get used to this complex orbment system, it's, I don't know, I don't want to sound demeaning as if like you couldn't figure it out, but it might overwhelm some that wouldn't be thinking, oh, there's so many technical aspects that I have to pay attention to and think about in my loadout, etc., etc. But for those with a decent bit of experience, looking for a new story to unfold within their realm of interest, I would say giving FC a try is worth it. At least give it a good 4 to 7 hours to catch your interest and maybe even enthrall you, because if you're not the biggest fan of the combat and all, the story and the characters might be what keeps you enthralled. In the long run, my personal rating and thoughts of Trails in the Sky FC have to be a commendable 6 out of 10. It shoots for something unique in a world of very common ideas and tropes. But besides that, it does a good job of singling out its characters and making them memorable in their own ways. And that is something I can really commend and enjoy this game for. That will have to be me for now. Hopefully I see you guys around, and Weebsaurus out. Have a good day, everyone.